All right, hi, I'm George McGraw, use he, him pronouns. I'm the founder and CEO at DigDeep, and I'm so delighted to be with you all today. You know the old saying, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And in the domestic wash sector, we've never really had a together before. I mean, a few of us here and a few of us there. I mean, tireless advocates working on things like affordability and water quality, including the sort of luminaries of the water space that I have on stage with me here today. But this group of people is really uniquely dedicated to coming together to, as Kabir and Emma said, close the US water and wastewater access gaps for good, really get service to the people in our country who have been forgotten by all of the work that we've done for decades to build one of the most complex, successful water systems that any nation has ever had. These are families who wake up every morning wondering how they'll get enough clean water to survive. And a lot of the folks from those communities, serving those communities, are here with us today. And I just want to say, first of all, how grateful I am that all of you took time out of your busy schedules and lives to come here and share your knowledge and your expertise, to share your heart, to share your community, so that we can rally together and become a collective force for change. I personally, and many other people in this room, you probably wonder, like, why is Water for People doing this with DigDeep? They don't even work in the US, do they? Well, it's because we've seen how successful a model like this can be in international development. Like we have more than cut in half, just over the last couple decades, the amount of people around the world without access to basic water and sanitation resources. And we've done that because that community has come together as a community of practice and built that collective power to advocate for funding, to build collective knowledge through data and research, to say, like, okay, well, in this geographic region, we're gonna cut in half the number of people defecating in the open in the next 25 years. And then they've done it. And so this is all in service of building an approach like that, which, by the way, will save the US economy $9 billion a year and stop 64,000 new cases of type 2 diabetes and save 900 million work and school hours that we lose every year, and help the communities who have been so, egregiously disinvested and ignored, build up the economic and social power that they need to compete with the rest of the country for the resources they need to live healthy, thriving lives. So that's why we're here, that's the context, and now it's my job to introduce the incredible panelists up here with me. First, I have Olga Morales-Pate, a good friend of mine and yours. Olga is an accomplished leader in environmental justice, and she is the CEO of RCAP, where she became CEO in 2022, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. She became the CEO of RCAP after leading RCAC, the Western RCAP, for 19 years, 20 years?
I started when I was 4.
Yes, exactly. We all invest in good skincare up here. She also served on the EPA's National Drinking Water Advisory Council as an appointee of President George W. Bush. Please join me in welcoming Olga. And next to me is Daryl Vigil. Daryl is Hickory Apache, Jemez Pueblo, and Zia Pueblo, and he's currently the co-facilitator for the Water and Tribes Initiative. He also serves on the State of New Mexico's Water Task Force and on New Mexico's 50-year Water Plan Committee. That's a lot of pressure. Among his many, many previous roles, Daryl is the former chairman of the 10 Tribes Partnership for the Colorado River, chairman of the board for the Hickory Apache Tribal Utility Authority, and former water administrator for the tribe. Join me in welcoming Daryl. All right, Daryl got a rock star scream. We love that. And last but not least, probably the person in this room you all know the best. Well, you'll know me the best after this, but that's Mami Hara. Mami is the CEO of the U.S. Water Alliance, and prior to serving at the Alliance, she was general manager of the Seattle Public Utilities, where she shepherded leading affordability, customer service, zero waste, anti-displacement, and of course, One Water programs. Under Mami's leadership, the Alliance recently became a National Environmental Finance Center, along with RCAP. And please join me in welcoming Mami Hara. All right, so we went ahead and broke this discussion up into several themes. Just, for those of you in the audience who are starting your morning, maybe haven't had enough coffee yet, really need a roadmap on how to follow this. Shout out to Pacific timers. We're going to start with the landscape of the water access gap. What does this problem really look like in people's lived experience, and how are we as organizations encountering it kind of in the wild? So my first question is for you, Daryl. Natives face uniquely difficult access barriers to wash. In fact, Native American households are 19 times more likely than white households to lack taps and toilets. Can you tell us a little bit more about these obstacles and how the water access gap impacts Native Americans and tribes and what you've seen in your work?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be here and give a shout out to my good friend Emma. The creator put us together in the Grand Canyon. Always be grateful for that. But yeah, I mean, and it goes to Kabir's point, if we're not going to delve too much into the why, but especially when you're talking about indigenous folks in this country, the why is still an important thing to understand. And at the heart of this, kind of across the board, is the lack of recognition of tribal sovereignty. And what does that mean, even? Because we've been determined that we're a domestic sovereign, but what does sovereignty even mean? And in this case, it means a continued right to exist as who we've been and who we will continue to be and who we've always been. And through the processes of extermination, assimilation, and termination, it makes it really hard for that to happen. And so you have to remember again that those practices are still in place, and they get affected through all the government systems because all those systems didn't recognize us. And so if you take, for instance, water in the Colorado River Basin, the compact was developed in 1922. My tribe settled their water rights in 1992. It's taken us 30 years to build some capacity to be able to even kind of talk about our water rights that we got. Because the federal government, didn't allow the process for settlements in the United States is so disconnected in terms of it's still based on PIA. My tribe is semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers, and so when you put us on a finite piece of land, that was genocide. That took away completely who we were. And we've spent the rest of this time, trying to just survive because we've never had a reconciled past. Therefore, we can't really have a future because that past is not reconciled. And so at the heart of this, again, in this system that we live in, it's about capacity. And so building that capacity and building that inclusion and building that understanding, is something that, is my life's work now. But, and so, the challenges are the historic challenges still exist today. And I was laughing with Emma because, I turned 62 last month, and but so I grew up in Zia Pueblo for the most part when I was a little kid, and I remember those winter nights because Zia sits up on a mesa, and having to go to the house when it's snowing outside. And then kind of sitting there with the snow blowing in through the slats. And so, I understand what it's like not to have access to clean water or to facilities as well. And so that historic challenge is still going on. And it's pervasive across all areas of tribal governance. And so those things like lack of access to clean water and missing and murdered indigenous people are all symptoms of that broader lack of acknowledgement of who we are as a people. And so, creating that understanding and creating a process, and so those have been the challenges in terms of, and that's the reality. And the reality is that Native Americans are at the bottom of the worst list in every category. When you starve a people, what happens? You go the other direction, diabetes, heart disease. I mean, the extermination continues because we don't have access to this.
Thank you. Tough to hear, but beautifully said. I think when most people think of places without access to water and sanitation, they don't think of their own backyards. Olga, similarly, rural communities are more likely to lack water and sanitation access, and I know RCAP has a deep relationship with rural communities all over the country. Can you paint a picture of how you see the water access gap pop up in your work?
Certainly. First of all, good morning. Buenos dias. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, George, and DigDeep and everybody. And thank you all for being here and being part of this conversation, which I think it's very, very important for all of us. RCAP has been around for 50 years. And over the 50 years, we have been working on what I call the horizontal infrastructure, working with communities to develop water and wastewater systems, the infrastructure that we need underground. However, for those of us who move in the water space, we know that there are 50-some thousand small water systems. The average community size that RCAP works with is about 1,600 population. And one of the challenges that we see is how difficult, in the face of increasing regulations, aging infrastructure, increasing requirements, to sustain those communities. And so things like PFAS, which is the new term, not so new, but it's concerning because it creates an even bigger challenge for communities to be able to deliver water. At some point, water, and this is the kind of stuff that makes me lose sleep at night, at what point is drinking water not going to be sustainable or affordable for our communities? When we lack the economies of scale. Because when you have 1,500 population, we're talking roughly 500 connections, there are no economies in that. And we are squeezing, and I say we because we sometimes, RCAP works with the communities to create the rate studies to cover the cost of providing the water. We have a lot of challenges in regulations. We have a lot of challenges in infrastructure. And it is it's a big challenge for us as technical assistance providers to see this because there's no sustainability. And so at some point, and it needs to happen really quick, we need to talk about the sustainable model. I'm gonna take us back to about 40, 50 years when a lot of the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act came about, and a lot of funding from the federal government came about that created a lot of the community systems that we have across the country. Those community water systems were created by volunteers. It was a generation of volunteers that is no longer around. And it was created as a model that is no longer sustainable, not in the face of all the requirements from funding and everything else that I just mentioned. When do we need to assess, or how soon as a country do we assess, and do we own the fact that it's not working, that generation is gone, and we need to approach solutions for our communities in a comprehensive manner, meaning that it takes more than water for communities to be sustainable, for a community to have its needs met. And so the challenges that we have in the work that we do at RCAP and all of you, it's a pretty difficult one. And there is not one solution that applies to every community. Every community is different. It's just as individual as all of us here. And to Daryl's point, we need to acknowledge the cultural values and the significance of every community, always keeping in mind that they too deserve a better life. The residents deserve a better life, that we all have the right, should have the right to access of drinking water.
Mami, there's often sort of an urban-rural divide in the way we manage our water and wastewater resources, and probably no one knows that better than the Alliance because of how diverse your membership is. Can you tell us about some of the issues impacting both rural and urban communities when it comes to wash access, things like climate change, workforce development, affordability?
Sure. Thank you for that question. And good morning, everyone. It's nice to see so many friends here. Certainly, the issues that you mentioned, climate change, the lack of a water workforce, the need which is accelerating, the issues accelerating around both of those, the increasing lack of affordability for water, and a whole host of other issues that are related to chronic underinvestment and systemic racism in the ways that we have managed water systems and not invested in water systems is leading to a really severe exacerbation of need both in urban and rural areas. And not just for WASH, but also for durable infrastructure. I think those two issues are closely related. Through our EFC and our many programs, we see needs that are not just related to emergencies in urban areas, but that are ongoing needs, which is, I think, really surprising and invisible to most people. We see these issues in suburban areas and, of course, rural areas. So the need for both WASH and greater water infrastructure across all areas is, I think, an invisible and really growing need. The analogy that I like to use is when you think about people experiencing the lack of housing in the United States. And a lot of times folks fall in one camp or the other. They're advocates for emergency services for people experiencing houselessness, that we have to really double down on that. Of course we do, but then some people are like, well, no, but we need to invest in permanent housing. This is the most important thing because that's the real solution. You have to do both. You cannot, you have to alleviate immediate needs while also figuring out how to build for more permanent and durable solutions. And at the Alliance, we are really, I think all of our members are really, dedicated to try to figuring out how do you do this together? Are there one water solutions that help you to achieve the needs, address immediate needs and work on more permanent, more holistic, sustainable solutions? But I think that that's an ongoing conversation. We often look at delivering both of these very separately and aren't working, I think, in concert enough and building those bridges between those needs and solutions that can, make the most of all of the energy and money that needs to go into this.
My next question is for all of you. I mean, it's really clear that no matter the context, whether it's on tribal land, in rural areas, in urban and peri-urban areas, we're facing a real challenge, a real existential crisis when it comes to wash access. And I mean, a lot of us in this room have seen what that looks like firsthand. People not being able to protect their families, protect their health, build any sort of economic wealth or mobility, people losing their lives because of waterborne illness or suicidal ideation, things like that. And yet, awareness really seems to be a key problem. I mean, it seems crazy that this is the first ever time that organizations have come together to discuss this issue themselves. I mean, we come together in a lot of different forums to talk about other things, and a lot of us are already connected, but we haven't been working together, and the American public hasn't really been talking about this. I mean, most Uber drivers I've ever met have no idea about what the hell I do for a living and why it matters. And they're like, okay, well, that doesn't seem real, but sure. And they're like, oh, is that like my wife has a goddaughter that's been raising money for a well in Namibia. Is that sort of, it seems like Americans are more conscious of other countries' basic access for water struggle than they are our own in the United States. And I'm curious why you think that is. And I'd love to ask you first, Olga.
Thank you, George. So I'll share a little bit about myself. I grew up in northern Mexico, and I was one of those kids that had the privilege. I'll say it's a privilege, and I'll explain why. Privileged to haul water. Privileged because that's what got me here. I don't think I would be here had I not had that experience, to really know how running water changes your life and changes the economy of a community. Now, why isn't it more widespread in the United States? And I agree with you. The Lyft drivers, the Uber drivers, know nothing about this. So it's an education opportunity. That's what we need to start.
A new campaign.
But I think the reason, the lack of awareness, I don't know so much that it's intentional, but it's not sexy. There's nothing sexy about it. And to Kavir's point earlier, we should not have to be here. If there was fairness in water being delivered to every resident in this, every American, regardless of location, there wouldn't be a need for us to be here. There wouldn't be a need for us, period. That is not the case. So it is not, it's not sexy, but it needs to be talked about. And we need to make it sexy so that it gets funded, so that we can begin to talk about the solutions that need to happen. It is important that we become, all of us, I think I'm going to get to the last question, but all of us walk out of here with that as a charge, to bring attention to the fact that there are over 2 million people in this country. And as I said earlier, PFAS and other regulations are going to make that number grow, because water is not going to be affordable. And so we're not moving in the right direction. All of us in this room and beyond have the responsibility to bring attention to it, whether it's sexy or not. It is the reality, and we all deserve the same thing, but we're not all getting it.
And for those wonks, and yeah, let's clap for that.
Thank you.
For those wonks in the room, you know, that number 2.2 million is extrapolated from American Community Survey census data that we parsed with the U.S. Water Alliance back in 2019. But if you've been paying attention, the long form of the 2020 census tells us that maybe for the first time in U.S. history, that number is increasing across all 50 states. I think stresses like climate change, historical disinvestment, and to your point, the increasing burden, the increasing regulatory burden, how expensive that is, and how the sort of resources to match that haven't been keeping up. All major challenges. Daryl, how does it look from where you're sitting? Why do you think Americans aren't paying attention to this issue the way they should?
Yeah, I think it goes back to a little bit of that context that I provided earlier in terms of, you know, when you dehumanize a race of people, you know, they're not very important and they're not a priority. And so, you know, when I first got into this, and I really believe it was creator-driven in terms of, I used to be in the casino, oil and gas business before, and my tribe fired me, and I tell them now it's the best thing you ever did for me, because I became the water administrator. And but one of the things that, you know, that when I got into this water world, and now I have this huge water family, you know, was the fact that there was just no recognition of tribes and tribal water rights in the Colorado River Basin. 30 beautiful tribes, unique tribes. And so I said for the first 2 years over and over again, if you know one tribe, you know one tribe. Because there is no one tribal solution. I mean, each individual one is an individual sovereign with their own culture, their traditions and language. And so that part of that of my work has been trying to humanize us in terms of, you know, we own 25% of the water rights in the Colorado River, but we have no structural inclusion to that. But yet, you know, our water has been saving the basins behind for, you know, decades now, since settlements have been in place. And, you know, I was really moved by, you know, talking about, you know, transformation. You know, because in the Colorado River Basin, you know, they've tried to do this kind of, what do they call it, you know, use things from the past and incremental change. And in my mind, there's nothing you can take from the past policy paradigm that will work now, because there were so many voices that were not included in those conversations. So in the Colorado River Basin, one of the things I tell them is, wow, you have an opportunity to really create a new paradigm in terms of how policy is created, and making sure that all the voices are included. And for Native Americans, that's inherent to the environment as well. Like, it's unspoken. And so, I mean, of course, you know, the environment needs that as well. And one of the things is that, you know, this experiment of the United States has only been over a little 200 years. We've been living sustainably in that basin for over 30,000 years. And, you know, and what was the success then? You know, right now, climate change is absolutely an existential threat for indigenous people, you know, because of the facts that I just lined out. You know, it's not a good situation. And, you know, I get teared up because, you know, we died at almost twice the rate of any ethnicity during COVID. And then, you know, my Aunt Anne had to die in the hospital, you know, with nobody by her. You know, and 6 million people went poof off of this earth. And then we don't acknowledge that. And, you know, and so, you know, when I think about these things, you know, it's like we're in this for apparently 150, we're 150 years, we're 20 years into that. And so, you know, we better start looking at those solutions that may be available right in front of us in terms of those people that are in your own backyards, in terms of what sustainability and resilience looks like. And it's amazing that, you know, my people got put on a permanent piece of land, were starved, had to adopt a governance structure that didn't fit them. And the BIA built the system, first wastewater system in the town, and we adopted it 30 years later. And it was asbestos-lined pipes, and we had a high incidence of cancer. And again, you know, there's that tie-in to that continued genocide in terms of, you know, we don't value you enough. And, you know, we're doing work with, you know, some tribes in the basin right now where, you know, Indian Health Service is the primary provider of everything. And so you have villages competing against each other for this resource. And so, it's, again, to highlight that, and I think it's been expressed really well by my co-panelists in terms of, like, having a values conversation. And real quickly, you know, most people in the basin that we've talked to absolutely value a healthy, sustainable living Colorado River. And then in their professional lives, you know, whatever the rules that they work on are oppositional to their personal values. And even in the federal government, that's the same way. And so how do we completely change this paradigm, you know, so that, you know, you don't have people having to execute things that, you know, that are against their own value system. And so that's one thing that we've done over and over again is, you know, build those relationships. Those are the most important thing.
Yeah, this idea that people are living in opposition to their own values, and that's why these things right in front of us seem so hard to access or so hard to see. I think that's deeply insightful. Mami, how about for you?
Acknowledging that we have a systemic lack of sanitation and drinking water for a growing number of people in our nation, I think flies in the face of the image that a lot of people want to have of our nation and their identity, you know, as members of the United States. There's almost a calculated invisibility of the structural issues around lack of infrastructure, the disparities, you know, around race and income in the United States, that these are an indicator and a manifestation of. And so, you know, this, people don't want to see. They don't want to see it. You know, I think there's a lot of evidence that would, I think, really, if people were, you know, more sensitive or willing to see it, you know, would be really committed to investing at a different level. But something happened where, you know, with the United States, right, we're a young country, as it's been pointed out, and, you know, we were, I think acknowledging that we were in some kind of process of evolution, and something happened where that kind of sense stopped around water and water infrastructure and sanitation. And we need to just, I think, embrace the fact that we need to continue to improve, that our culture also has to, evolve with that kind of investment. And so, I think that, just acknowledgement is the first step, right? It's like, just like, when you have a problem, in your household, and you're like, I'm ignoring it, because it'll go away. It's not going to go away. We have to acknowledge it, and we have to say, this is, we're going to do better, and we need to, really change our sense of who we are. And but I think there's some, I'll just bring it down to ground a little bit, that's very abstract. In urban areas, for example, there's a sense that, the system is already built out. Everybody who lives in this city should be well served. It's just a problem. It's a housing problem, not an infrastructure problem. That people aren't being served. But the problems are getting worse in cities, and that's really tied to growing income disparity, which, and there's a lot of masking of the issues, because overall a city is assessed by its overall wealth, and so the increasing wealth of a few is really precluding sufficient investment in urban areas as well. But this story plays out in every size community.
All three of you essentially talked about cultural change as what we need to sort of invest in, and I think, speaking personally, one of my deepest hopes for us as a group of people here today is that, we can come together to start to be a little bit of a mirror that we can hold up to the country, so that they can see, like, who we really are, what choices we're really making, how we're letting some of our neighbors live, and start to produce some of that change. Speaking of producing change, we've talked about the water access gap. We've talked about this lack of awareness. I want to switch us now to a brief conversation about some solutions to kind of whet our appetites for this week. And Mami, I want to stay with you for a second. Sure. The Alliance has made really great strides over the years, building a networked national approach around a really key theme: one water. I serve as Water and Power Commissioner for Los Angeles, and around the Department of Water and Power in LA, we're always talking about one water. It's a really powerful concept, and I'm wondering if you can give us all a little wisdom around why a national approach, why a networked approach. What does that make possible? Where's the power in that?
The basic power in a network is that you don't just have one sector trying to develop the answers. It's essential that an inclusive and broad multi-sectoral approach is used in solving these huge, thorny challenges around WASH and water infrastructure, water workforce. And it's really important to co-create, with the communities that are most impacted by the need, which is something that the U.S. Water Alliance's network, most of our members aim to do, and that's the kind of the working model. I do believe that a networked approach, kind of an overlapping of networks, is also really key. If the WASH network stands alone, it can preclude the opportunity to really connect and develop, long-term ties, and to greater advocacy across all of the, kind of intersecting issues. These, as you pointed out, George, in the beginning of, your questions to all of us, there are multiple and intersecting issues and needs that come together, through this one lens of WASH. But our answers have to, the solutions that we come to together have to also reach out back to those drivers. And I know that sounds like a lot on our plates, but that's the purpose of networks. It allows for us to collectively do that work. And just from my history working in networks, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network helped to foster the Green Infrastructure Leadership Exchange when I built that network. The U.S. Water Alliance's network was fostered by NACWA at the beginning. And those those ties remain, but I think that there's an opportunity with this particular topic and with One Water and water equity to really bring them together in a more consistent and full way so that we can solve problems together.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And I think if we're going to do that, government is going to have to be a really key partner for us. The way we've invested in this infrastructure as a country through, our government agencies and our elected leaders has been uneven. Government, I think, is also the only actor that can really help us solve this problem at scale and help us, manage some of the issues around the lack of sustainability or affordability when we put this on the back of these communities that have been told, you have to catch up with everybody else, but we have both of your hands tied behind your back. And Olga, you have been an incredible partner through RCAP to rural communities, but also worked really successfully with government, most recently as an environmental finance center. But you've really seen when that relationship kind of sings on the ground, you've really seen what that looks like. What does an effective role for government in closing the water access gap look like from where you're seated, and what do you want to see change there?
That's a very good question, George, and I think that there are a lot of opportunities. Thank you, Mami, for your comments, and Daryl. I think we're at a time and a place. We probably have been here for a long time, but more critically now, where we need to be more intentional about how we move forward to begin to address the challenges that we have. I have been saying I was a technical assistance provider for the first 12 years at RCAC, and I always felt, even though I'm always going to be a technical assistance provider, I always felt like I was working out of a Band-Aid box, addressing communities on their very specific challenge, not in an intentional way, not in a holistic way, not in a way that would get to communities to sustainability. And that's what I mean. Band-Aid solutions don't work, because the hemorrhage is going to show up somewhere else, and it's going to be bigger, and it's going to take more resources. So I think we need to be intentional. We need to recognize that rural America is essential to all of us. It's self-preservation. You all had breakfast this morning. That breakfast didn't come from DC. It came from out in the country, somewhere in a rural community. Putting solutions for rural America is putting solutions for urban America. We need to really remove that divide that has been in place for such a long time and begin to think of as a country and begin to operate that way. All of us that move in the U.S. WASH sector know about these things, and it's a boulder that we push up the hill. Sometimes we do better than others, and sometimes that boulder rolls back and runs us over, and we have to get up and do it again. But it's time really to invest in a very intentional way on how to create sustainable communities, even farther, resilient communities in the face of climate impact and climate change. So it's an opportunity really to work, to be more intentional. I think the word that I want us to think about when we do this work is, let's take a step back. Where does this community need to be? What do they need to be themselves to sustain, to thrive? Is it $500,000 to fix the problem that we have in front of us? Or is it $5 million to get them through the next 20 years? I think intention is one of the things that we can work with government on.
And by the way, if we invest that $5 million in a holistic solution for a community, the research shows us that we're going to get $5 back for every one of those dollars we invest. So it's not like that money is lost. It's money that's making money, like you said, in rural America, bringing us the things that we need to build the economy across the country. Many of those rural communities are tribes, and I think two of the most exciting things that I've probably ever seen in my career happen in the last couple years. One, the BIL funded the entire sanitation deficiencies list at IHS, which was this $3.5 billion of earmarked funds that are going directly to tribes through the IHS to build systems that the IHS has been keeping on a list, for more than 20 years now. And they've been saying to Congress every year, we need to build these systems, these reservations are falling behind. Well, having that list and the advocacy by tribes around that list got that list funded for the first time in U.S. history. And now the work is getting that money out the door and getting those systems built. A huge challenge, but a huge sign for hope. The other thing that I've been really buoyed by lately is, a lot of the work that we do in communities, I'm sure that you all have heard this. You enter communities, and a lot of the communities you work with, the first thing they say is we feel forgotten. We feel like we're out here trying to solve a problem, there's no one to help, and we've been left behind. The place that I feel that the deepest and experience that the most is always with our tribal partners. But recently at DigDeep, actually, some of our folks on the Navajo Water Project were visiting some of our folks in West Virginia on the Appalachia Water Project. And they were trying to get running water to a house at the top of this mountain holler. And one of the Navajo water techs said, well, why don't we take one of the systems we install in Navajo and change it and make it collect rainwater? And they worked with the engineer on Appalachia who's here and built a pilot system that would work for that family. And this is technology that was, built and piloted and tested by Native folks first, now serving the water needs of a predominantly white community that used to be really wealthy. I mean, that is the American dream. There is so much, Daryl, that tribes are doing that's really successful in advocacy, in technology, in partnerships and solutions. Like those things, what are you seeing on the ground that gives you hope for closing the water access gap?
It gives me hope, and sometimes it takes time again, just because of capacity at the tribal level, and building relationships, takes time, and trust takes time, and that's at the heart of it, in terms of having somebody that you can trust, that has some integrity to move something forward. And one of the interesting things is that, money is really great. There's a lot of it out there. And money's never really been the issue. It's been about capacity and about recognition of sovereignty and self-determination. And that's something that I'm excited about, because we've spent the time to build those foundational relationships, not only with other tribes, but with state government and federal government, because they all have to be connected. Policy absolutely needs to be connected to the ground, the work that's being done on the ground. And those people who do the work on the ground need to understand what the policy is and hopefully have contributed to it. And so, that's the exciting part. It's happening, at this time, and as you said, and Lorelei Cloud, who's vice chair of the Southern Ute, likes to say, it's historic, but it shouldn't be. And so a big shout out, to folks like, under Water and Tribes Initiative started 8 years ago as a conversation between Dr. Matt McKinney and I about how can we be of help? We had just changed to the Trump administration, and all the momentum that the 10 tribes had made with tribal water study had come to a halt, and the conversation needed to continue. People needed to understand. So we created data sets that didn't exist so people could understand, who tribes were and what the need was. And then we spent a lot of time telling them what the need was, and then they kept asking, well, what do you want? And we had to keep saying, well, this is what we want, over and over and over again. And so, those, and as a result of that initial conversation, it spawned so many other new conversations that exist in the basin now that never existed between tribes, between states, and this federal tribe states group is an extension of the tribe's efforts to have part of the conversation. And just recently, the Upper Colorado River Commission signed an MOU, historic again, with the 6 Upper Basin tribes to work together collectively to the extent of the current law. And that is really, really huge, because that's another component of it too, is building those relationships within the states themselves. And so inside of Water and Tribes Initiative, it spawned all these conversations, but it also has spawned other movements, that have kind of taken on their own life. I'll always be grateful to former Assistant Secretary Ann Castle, Amy McCoy, Heather Tanana, where are you? There she is. who really, took on the Universal Access to Clean Water initiative. We studied the Colorado River Basin first because we knew it. Then it became a national initiative. Then it created legislation, and then it got broader support. Wow, pretty magical, the human relationship. And then we had we're guided by an incredible group of leadership, 16-member leadership team that's all voluntary. That's had the likes of Tanya Trujillo, Assistant Secretary Ann Castle, Mike Connor, who's now at the Army Corps of Engineers. People just want it to be of help. And we're guided by those folks. And four women that were on the leadership team, including Krista Tully Cordova, and where is Tazba? Anyway, they really had a conversation one day about, like, wow, we know, and I know too, because I was raised by 3 very strong grandmothers and a strong mother, that Native women are absolutely the backbone of Native communities. And they wanted to create a mechanism for succession and mentorship in spite of patriarchal governance structures and in spite of opportunity. What a cool thing, And so all these, one conversation with an Anglo guy from Montana, I absolutely creator-driven in my mind in terms of what we try to stick to, which is really just helping to build and enhance tribal capacity, and they need to figure out that for themselves. And there's a lot of tribes out there that aren't even there yet to look at it. We adopted governance structures in 1934, a lot of us did, because we had to. And those governance structures, guess what? They were patriarchal and controlling. And guess what? They're very effective still. And guess what? They've spawned negative politics on the reservation, who are gatekeepers now. And that's the reality of it. And so, tribes are at this unique place now where absolutely they've built some capacity, not all of them, but to really recognize, where what their contribution is and what they need for their own people, because they didn't have any idea before.
So we're about to close. Obviously, this is the seed of a domestic wash sector. Let's do a very brief exercise. Raise your hand if you're from an impacted community or serve one directly. Beautiful. Now raise your hand if you work in data research, a university setting, a think tank, something contributing to the knowledge around this problem. Beautiful. Engineering, funders, technicians, spades and shovel people, raise your hands. Government partners, where are you? I know there's some in the room. Awesome. This is the wash sector. In about a minute each, I would love for each of you to sort of offer a kernel of wisdom for all of us as we go out and spend the next 3 days together exploring this topic. What do you want to leave us with? What is your hope for what we'll take from this conversation into the rest of the conversations we're going to have with each other as we begin to network? And Olga, may I start with you?
Thank you, George. So my charge to community leaders is please become loud, really, really loud, because we can't be loud enough. We need your help to elevate the issues that are affecting you. To funders, please consider investing in the human infrastructure of our communities, because the tangible physical infrastructure is not 100% of the solution. It's really time to invest in building the capacity of our communities. To researchers and others, trust is the glue that holds our projects together, that holds our communities together. When you do research, build that into your research, because it's very important and it begins to tell the story of why our communities are who they are.
Thank you. Daryl?
I just think about climate change and where we're at today, and nursing this planet back to health. And what does that look like in reality? And I think, 30,000 years of existence, at least in the Colorado River Basin, in terms of a spiritual existence, and that's one thing that sovereignty means to me. It's a spiritual concept, and those things like farming that my Pueblo grandparents did, is also a spiritual practice. And so I think, these conversations have gone global with the indigenous community in terms of how do we do this together. And finally, I think in a recognition of the fact that, it needs to be built together based on those common values that we have. And so for me, I've got grandnieces and nephews. I don't have any grandchildren yet. I don't know what the problem is, but but wow, I got to see Crystal's little baby today again, Tazba. She's the cutest little thing ever, and that's the future. And always I was taught, that leave it better than we found it. And when you think about, everything that I was taught, that we're just a part of the greater whole, and when you come from that perspective, it creates humility, and then it gives you a different perspective of not only the environment but our brothers and sisters as well.
Mami, you'll have the last word today. What advice and direction do you want to leave us all with?
Solving for the nation's water access issues defies any silver bullet or work at just one scale. All the sectors that George named today are needed desperately to affect a cultural transformation, where the primacy of this essential need is centered culturally. And the needs and the potential of the communities that are most impacted by the lack of water infrastructure and water access are centered as well. And so I hope that we can all figure out a way to create permanent and durable solutions while we tackle WASH issues and innovate on how we can collaborate on workforce solutions, climate solutions, a whole host of innovations that are needed by co-solving them together.
Well, if I've learned anything today, it's that the existing systems and programs and funding mechanisms that we have, if those were going to solve the problem, they would have already. And so we're all going to go out and figure out what the hell else to do. Enjoy all of your time today. Please join me in giving a round of applause both to our panelists and to yourselves.